Welcome to another adventure in Guyanese literature. This time we look at the dynamics of a language through the use of this book, a collection of Indian Guyanese words and phrases and their meanings by Harry T Hergash. Welcome, Harry, to the program.
Thank you very much, Petamber. Appreciate it.
I would like to start this discourse by quoting a few words from Dr. Harry Persaud, who is a cultural anthropologist. And I quote, "Words are essential symbols expressing multiple experiences, values, and customs in the daily lives of a people. Hence, we come to know the construct of a culture and its reality by its language usage." End of quote. There's a whole lot being said here in those few words. But apart from these few words, I know you have other reasons for writing, collecting this book. So let's start at the beginning. What were those reasons for writing
Well,
this
actually,
book?
Petamber, thank you for this opportunity. Yes, there are several reasons, but the driving force to a large extent is tied up with what Dr. Prasad said there
Yes.
in his commentary on the book. I believe that language is an essential part of a people's cultural heritage.
Yes.
And in Guyana, as far as I know, the Indian ancestral language, or if I may say languages, because there were more than one that were brought to Guyana.
Namely,
Well, there were Bhojpuri, there was Maithili, there was, Bengali. To a smaller extent, there was, you look at the southern languages, Telugu, which was part of
there's a language called Madrasi, or the
I
one that
think
Madrasi used.
my feeling is that the Telugu and Tamil are South Indian languages, which are within the Dravidian group of languages. They were called Madrasi because in those days, Madras was a presidency under the British. And the people from South India came from Madras, Madras presidency. Today, Madras is a city in South India. But in those days, it was a presidency. The British had 3 presidencies around that time. So I think it was a all-encompassing term for the languages.
Oh,
And
my wife comes from a lineage of Madrasi, and she still uses
yes,
some of those
some of
words.
those words. That's interesting because if I may just jump ahead a little bit, I'm doing something else where I have looked at, and with the permission of Mr. Moses Nagamutu, I have looked at Henry's Cure.
Yes,
But
yeah, yes,
to tie that back with what I want to say is the impetus for this book,
yeah.
the words and phrases and the language has been declining in usage over the years to the point where now I think the Indian language, the ancestral language, is perhaps almost totally extinct. There may be just a handful of speakers, and perhaps most of those are out of the country than within Guyana, right? Now, in the case of the South Indian languages, they are almost completely gone. Just a few words. And those few words are not as well established in Guyanese Creolese as the North Indian dialects. Incidentally, several of the dialects that came, they were considered to be, they were grouped together, and the Indian immigrant called their language Hindustani. It wasn't called Hindi, or it wasn't called Bhojpuri as we are now hearing from scholars. Bhojpuri was only one of the many dialects, Hindi dialects that came from North India. Now, you would know from history that the North Indians were the majority of the recruits who came to Guyana, well over 80%.
Yeah.
So it's not surprising that their words and phrases
Will be in
have
preponderance.
dominated the
That's right.
scene.
Right.
And those are the words have tended to migrate into Guyanese Creolese. But even those that have migrated into Guyanese Creolese, some of them are in declining use. What's kind of interesting for me is the fact that if you look at the evolution, the evolutionary process, you find that as more and more words, Indian Guyanese words, are entering into the into Creolese, the number of them are decreasing. So while, if I may say, while Creolese is absorbing, as opposed to the 1960s, for example, there were few Indian Guyanese words in Creolese, in Guyanese Creolese. Today there may be more because more people know about Mamu and Mami and Nani and Nana, right, among all the races. But yet the other words, and even among the Indian community, Nana and Nani and Aja and Aji and these words,
Are dying out.
they're dying out.
Right.
So there's a greater penetration into Creolese in terms of reaching the wider population, but yet their usage, among the traditional users of the language is decreasing
Let's for a moment
significantly.
focus on why this is happening or has happened, the decline in the use. I noticed you said, I'm quoting page 12 here. I quote, however, in their struggle for survival and acceptance, they were unable to ensure the continuity of the ancestral languages and dialects. You're talking here about the work and the toil taken away from the F.
That's
Were there other subtle things that happened to cause the decline in the use?
Well, there are a number of factors, and it would be interesting because I'm hoping in the future, in my other stuff that I intend to publish, where I look at Moses' book, I look at the fall, the decline of the language and the reasons. One obvious factor was the snobbery associated with, with the use of English language and the looking down upon the Indians who could not speak proper English. That was a major factor. And I remember when I was studying Hindi, many people were, because Hindi was being studied in the evening in the Hindu temples and so on, many people who would pass on the road would be making noise and would be making mockery of us going to Hindi school.
I witnessed that.
So it was not the in thing, People wanted to shun that old Indianness about them, and language was a very visible thing about, So that certainly was an important aspect of an important reason for the decline. But there were far more compelling reasons. For example, the language did not have currency. To be accepted in the society, social mobility, depended on acceptance and so acquiring English and even Creolese to some extent.
The lingua franca.
That's right. Yeah. So, there was no currency. There was nothing to be gained by retaining the language. Some other factors, for example, the dialects that came, many of them were not literary languages. They were not written. I spoke with one old gentleman who passed away recently, Mr. Booty Singh. People may know him as the oldest blogger.
Yeah.
He was just over 100 when he passed away. And his comment was, Bhojpuri was not only one of the languages and perhaps one of the major dialects. The problem was, at the time, Bhojpuri did not have any grammar. Right, so there were not much literary works. I have read from scholars. There's one scholar by the name of Uday Narayan Tiwari who has studied Indian Bhojpuri, and in his case, he said that the Brahmins were the people, the educated class, the teachers, and so on. And in the early period, the Brahmins moved towards Varanasi. the Brahmins from South India, they moved towards Varanasi where they perpetuated Sanskrit and not Bhojpuri. Only
So let me see if I can get this right
Yeah,
before you go on.
yeah.
I thought that all the languages came out of Urdu or Sanskrit.
Well, Urdu is a language, is a combination of languages, right? Persian, Arabic, Hindi, it's a beautiful language. And in fact, Bollywood uses Urdu.
Ah.
The songs are generally Urdu. Now, in the early period of the evolution, it was Hindustani that branched off into Urdu on the one side, which became more it acquired more of the grammar, I think, of the Persian and the Arabic languages, and Hindi, on the other hand, acquired more of the grammar and whatnot on the Sanskrit side. And the interesting thing about the language is that to this day, if a Pakistani, where Urdu is the official language, if a Pakistani speaks Urdu and an Indian speaks Hindi, if it's not the strict literary form of those languages, they can converse very easily. And in fact, I can understand a Pakistani speaking Hindi because I studied a little bit of Hindi. More than I can even understand a Hindi-speaking person from India.
All right,
So if I could just finish that point, the language, the origin was the same, but politics played an important role in the branching off of the two languages. And then Urdu became more written in the Arabic typescript, and Hindi became written more in the Devanagari typescript.
Good. We talk about the decline. Let's talk about the continuation or the survival of these languages, the Bhojpuri and other dialects. They have survived. I'm making a note from your writing in the lyrics, dialogues of the Bollywood movies. And over you'll find, it's not a debate, but more and more you'll find people asking, Petamber, do you understand that song? And it's difficult to answer because I don't know too many words, Hindi words. Or as you say, Urdu, right? But somehow you've got to give that reason as an emotional feel to what's happening, right? And I am, like others, able to follow along these songs and the movie without knowing the language. Let's talk about the survival.
The survival, I think, is certainly in doubt unless there's some attempt to perpetuate the language.
How can we do that?
And I think at one time in the 1980s, the early 80s, I believe, the University of Guyana had started to do some work teaching Hindi, and they were also teaching languages like Swahili and so on. But I think that came to an end. I'm not sure how you can do this, but I know the language has survived in Suriname for a number of reasons.
Yes.
It has also been surviving in Trinidad because there was a revival in Trinidad. And I think maybe a revival in Guyana could take place, but there will be a need for national policies, or certainly because you know what has happened is languages like Urdu and Hindi are dependent for their survival in Guyana, certainly, on the religious bodies.
Yeah.
And-
Before you continue and finish that thought, is it important that we continue these languages?
I think, and I may be a little bit controversial here, I think in the future, India and China will be two of the major powers in the world. And I know India has significant involvement, certainly in Guyana, in the industrial development process. So it would seem to me that it would be wise, not only from a cultural heritage point of view, but also from an economic point of view, to perpetuate the language.